The film we're gonna watch is a very moving film, and I want to prepare you to go on in a way it's a road film where we go along with the protagonist and one other woman, and we get to know their trauma and their pain. It is a very lyrical film that I think you will enjoy. Where the actual visuals will actually sometimes contrast with the voice, the narration that you're going to be listening to. So, but it's a very important film at the time in Mexico that the war on drugs has created about 234,000 dead since 2006, and many people think that about 25,000 disappeared, and so this is a very important documentary about the situation in Mexico. I hope you enjoy it. And we have other panelists who are today here to talk about this film. Alexandra Hidalgo from Writing Rhetoric and American Cultures, and then we have Erin Graham from the History Department at MSU, and finally we have Maria Serrato from the Capital Area Latina Youth. And I want to just jump in on the conversation, and I just want to point out a few of the themes, and I'm sure some of those themes are going to be addressed by the presenters. So the militarization, the issues of gender and motherhood in the film, the issues of the justice or the lack of justice in the system of exploitation, are some of the themes that we see. Of course, the war on drugs is kind of the backdrop of all this, and basically crime and crime syndicates. So if you want to start, Alexandra, some of the comments about
sure.
film.
One of the interesting things about the film is that we start and we have no idea. We're in the dark. It's almost a pity to watch with subtitles, right? Because you're really supposed to just have zero, just darkness, and this voice that we never see it. There's never a face. There's eventually a silhouette that works with it, right? So we're in this deep sense of uncertainty and confusion and foreboding, right? We know that, like, immediately she's like, oh, and I mean, all the other women in the jail. But I think that inability to see where we're at and to know who's speaking to us reflects her experience, right? So the film is putting us in a similar situation to the one where she was in, where you're feeling, part of your senses are gone, that you can't see, and then we start to see the sense of sort of poetic recreation of the past, but it's not. They didn't do a real recreation of the past. They just sort of found images that reflected some of the ideas, but those images are not in a jail, but they're just part of the regular place where they're living. So it gives us a sense of any of us could have this happen to us, and these kind of places are hidden from us, but they're right there. They're part of the world. So this idea of us being, we're walking by these spaces where these things are happening, and we're not even recognizing it. And one day it might be us who suddenly disappears. Some dear friend of us gives us up, and we're gone. So it's this idea of all of us being together on the same boat, even though we don't realize it.
Thank you. Hi, Erin Graham. I think the film is really dark, and I think you just spoke about that. I think it speaks to power, right? There's like issues of power throughout this film. You see it between the men in the prison and the female prisoners. In particular, I know they talked about the one male prisoner, but it's largely focused on this separation between men who are in the drug cartel and female prisoners, although we know that there is some, there are women in the cartels, of course, as well. I think for me as a historian, one of the things that this film really speaks to is, as historians, we talk about continuity and change over time. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is continuity here. This is, we can think about Arturo Durazo Moreno, who was the police chief in the late 1970s and early 1980s in Mexico City, who was making a very modest salary and ended up being a multimillionaire, hundreds of millions of dollars, and built a palatial, multiple palatial mansions in the Parthenon because of these his connections with drug cartels. And so that linkage, those linkages with the police, the people who are supposed to be upholding the law and are supposed to be protectors. We know in a lot of cases that doesn't happen. And the connections, the relationships between the police and the drug cartels being something that's continuity in Mexican history, and that this is that's not a change. I'm going to go to my notes to make sure there were a couple other things I wanted to touch on. I suspect that a lot of you, I was thinking about this at the beginning of the film. The film does a really good job spatially, kind of showing the different spaces and traveling through space. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear spatially on where things were. So that Matamoros is right there on the border. They talked about that. It's kind of on really close to the Gulf of Mexico, right there below Texas, and then of course Cancun, down in the Yucatan. And then it showed the traveling through from Mexico City, there in central Mexico, and then and Veracruz, going down along the Gulf of Mexico. And I thought the film did a really nice job of taking us through time and space, And then I thought another theme was the border and border violence that was talked a lot about in the film, and I won't take up too much time, but we can talk about that some more. So I think I've hit on my main points that I wanted to talk about right now.
I know we couldn't see the character, or we couldn't see Miriam and Monica, but I appreciate, we were with them, and then how we could never see them, but we could hear them, and I think that made it way more intimate for us to be able to be on this journey with them. In the bus ride, I felt like you were with her, we were going home, but it didn't mean everything was going to be better, because this is still happening. I just wanted something that you had said, about protectors. This is a little personal story real quick. My daughter left her blankie at school, and when we weren't for sure where it was at, she's like, we should call the cops and the protectors. And I was like, for a 3-year-old to say there's a difference between cops and there's protectors, that's already something that's where we are at in society today. And it was so awakening, because she said this last night, and before I even seen the movie, and I was just like, wow. It made me sad, because this is it's not happening here in our face, but we know it is. So I think it was just really moving for me, and especially as a mother, hearing a mother tell her story about being taken from her family, and then a mother whose daughter was taken from her, and just going through all those motions, and very touching, very touching. So.
We can open it up for questions. Go ahead.
I was wondering if any of you thought there was a thematic connection between, towards the end of both stories, when we heard that the mother thought that the fellow student Jesus had been really instrumental in the kidnapping, and whereas at first he was seeming to help, and then the recounting of the scene in the church, the Catholic church, as she specified, and that at the end, the man who had killed the other man who was praying in the church picked up a small female child and left. Do you think there might be a connection? But I know that Jesus in Latinx culture is not an uncommon name, but I'm wondering.
Well, the child was his daughter.
Right.
It was his baby.
I think, one of the interesting things about the film is really, it's really not, we don't see any violence, right, throughout the film, but it is about violence, right? And it is a complex representation of violence. Usually, male directors will show, like Tarantino style, violence where, there's like, guns and this and that, and here, all the violence, the violent appears as a traumatic event, right? It's really, they don't say it, it's silent, right? And so I think one of the issues with the sicario that kills all the Central American migrants is really complicating, it's really not just about individuals performing these things. They are trying to also keep their families safe. Their institutional problems and institutional forces that are keeping people from, or are making people do what they do and harming other people. And so, I think it's her realization that this violence is not just, this person is a bad person, that it is, it's actually much more complicated than that, that is a larger issue. Why do we have police brutality in the US? Is it because the cops are racist, or is it an institutionalized form of violence? And I think, the film complicates that question, and it doesn't give us an answer, but it definitely says, it's more complicated than that.
And I think, we'd like to think that the people who can beat people to death are just these monsters, but there's other sides to them. I mean, it shows they have babies that they love, and then they obviously, she didn't think he felt any remorse when he was killing, and then she sees him weeping and church. So I think it would be much nicer if they could just be these monstrous creatures that we could hate, but they are not usually. I mean, there are such creatures, but there's also just people who are part of our regular society who love their children, but then they also kill other people's children.
A part of me felt like he was forced into that position as well. He didn't even have a choice to do that job. This is his job, right. And he's remorseful every time it happens. But he just, everyone in the movie, they just have to go about their daily lives still. They just have to move on in a sense.
And I wonder if he was drugged. It sounded like the way that she's describing.
Yeah.
But the accountant, right? The accountant is also forcing. It's I'm sorry, I'm here again to get your money, So it's part of the whole system, right? Any other questions? No?
Actually, I wanted to make a comment because 5 years ago, I was affected by the cartel. My parents actually live in Sonora, Mexico, Sonora, Mexico, in a ranch, and they were attacked by the cartel. And so it does impact everybody. But the other piece too is, from this movie, is that, you were talking about the monstrosity of the killings and so forth, and it's easy to portray a lot of the cartel as monsters. But the young man that was sweeping in the church, I haven't the way that is so much part of the culture, the town that my parents live in, not just Sonora, but also Tijuana and Juarez, and I have family in those areas where it's right by the frontier, and it's almost a culture. It's like it's an everyday thing. A lot of times, people have friends that are involved in the cartel, or families that are involved in the cartel, but don't harm those people because there is a recognition of that. The other piece is a lot of times the police are corrupt, but not for the reasons that a lot of people think, that it's just the money. Is they're given an option. Either you become corrupt or we kill your family. How many people would rather choose to make money out of the corruption than to have their families massacred? So there is a lot of different pieces to what's going on in Mexico.
Yeah, the issue of vulnerability, I think, is one of the themes, right? And I think both women feel vulnerable. They feel, but they find hope within that vulnerability as well.
Over acceptance.
I think Miriam really spoke to that, right? When she was in that situation and started thinking, should I start working with them, for
Right.
them, right? I think her story really spoke to what you're saying. Yeah.
Or even just eventually the jail becomes something kind of familiar, becomes the home, it stops being
Right.
this.
It gets normalized.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, okay, I know the rules, like I understand the rules of here, but then then eventually she's like, well, I'm either gonna end up dead, like this kid my family runs out of money, or I'm gonna have to figure out how to
Survive. I just want to thank you for bringing the film to the attention of people because it is a real thing.
Thanks for your comment. Other questions, comments? I just wanted to I think the haunting last image, I think, as, somebody who's like, it's in a cenote, which is like one of those pools near Tulum, or, if you've gone to Cancun or Tulum or any of those areas, those are natural pools that are kind of underground. And that image, without the leg, right? It's a haunting image of the what the film is kind of telling us. How mutilated body of with this violence that it needs to be remembered and it needs to be processed, but it's also it's never really easy to talk about it, and so I think that is I think it's a great way how she captures that or that image of the payaso, the clown, right, waiting to come out. It's just it's great.